Hey guys, in this video we're going to do what I've been dreading, and that is covering the firearm and basically all of the settings. So to kind of sum it up, there's broken up into several different sections here, so I'll go ahead and compress them all. So starting from the top, we have our default stuff. Now this is, well, obviously default, so what the firearm is going to be starting out as. So that goes for things like, what are the stats? How much does this firearm weigh? So in this case, because the firearm itself is only the receivers, buffer tube, and magazine, I have it set to 3. So this is in come on, what's the word? Yeah, I want to say 3 weight. Got the stuff Europeans and a bunch of other places use. Kilos. And then we have the base ergonomics, the recoil multiplier, and the muzzle velocity multiplier. So this stuff here gets affected when you actually play based upon your actual, your attachments. So for example, your handguard here, that's going to add some weight. So if we click on the default part and we head over to it, we can see that stat. So this has a weight of 1 kilo. So just if we only did the handguard, we would go, when we start the game, to 4 kilos. So same thing goes for the rest of the components as well. Then ergonomics, this, again, all this stuff here gets affected by your parts. Ergonomics is used kind of in conjunction with aiming and a little bit of sway. So, for example, this has a default of 50 ergonomics. So let me go ahead and aim. And that's kind of the aim speed. Let's say you have crazy high ergonomics, like, heck, I'll do 900. And I'll hit play. So you can see it aims a lot faster. And there's really not much in terms of sway. Like, the sway kind of corrects itself almost immediately. So it really reduces that. Now, for your sway and your aiming, weight gets tied into that as well. So the heavier the firearm, the slower the time it's going to take to aim, and the more sway it's going to have because it's heavier. It's meant to kind of give it that feeling of weight. So if you go and you add a bunch of crap to your gun, it's going to get heavier. Its ergonomics might either go up or down, but ultimately you're most likely going to be lowering it's like your ADS speed and your sway, unless it's specific parts such as like a forward grip or something like that, where it's meant to kind of, for balancing purposes, kind of help those things. Now, your muzzle velocity multiplier, this is implemented into the example firearm, so I'm not going to touch too much on it, but you can kind of see the example implementation right here. So here I spawn my, example projectile. I get my firearm stats, I break it, and I get the muzzle velocity multiplier, and I just plugged that into my function for activate projectile. So it basically just takes the default speed of the projectile, multiplies it by whatever that is. So if you add a longer barrel, you can increase the muzzle velocity. Or if you have a specific muzzle device that you might want to do it for, depending on your game style, you can do that too. It kind of goes with really whatever parts you want. But that's kind of how that system gets handled. So moving on down, we have fire modes. Now, this again is meant to be implemented by yourself. So I provide an example implementation in the blueprint, but basically you have the ability to cycle through fire modes. This is already replicated. It's very simple to use. So when I press, actually that's in my character here. I think it's when I press B. Yes, no, F. So I get the firearm, and on the firearm I call cycle fire mode. It's a default function. You can go either up or down the list based upon, whether or not reverse is checked. And what it'll do is it will go through and actually handle the replication and handle the changing. And you have events and all that kind of stuff that you can fire when you change the fire mode. So you can kind of implement like your own little animation montage or audio, whatever you want in there. Moving on down, this again is meant to be implemented by yourself along with the burst count. Again, all this, I provide examples, but it's meant to be implemented in your own way. So the fire rate. Now, I recently, it's not part of the, hasn't been released yet, have set up a way to, as you can see here, return the value cycle rate multiplier. You can increase or decrease your fire rate based upon your attachments as well. So, for example, let's say you get a lightweight bolt, or bolt carrier, in this case for the M4, you will increase your fire rate. Let's say you add a suppressor. Well, you will increase your fire rate. You can have all that control directly through the parts. So for example, in the suppressor here, you can see I give that a cycle rate increase percentage of 20. So when I have my normal gun, I'll switch to full auto. I'll take the suppressor off, and this might be a little loud. So that is without a suppressor, and here's with. So with a suppressor, your fire rate goes up a pretty decent bit. So that's how that all gets handled. And again, it's be implemented yourself. I provide an example implementation right at the end of here, where I just fire the timer based upon the function get cycle rate. Now get default will simply return the default fire rate of 800. However, if this is unchecked, then it will return the one that gets modified by your other parts. Going down, we have the fire and aggregate system. So this will be for things like your muzzle flash. Now this gets trickled down from other parts as well. So for example, basically the way it would go down the chain in this case, so I have a suppressor, which has, I'm not going to be able to really click it, am I? Which has a surefire flash hider on it, which is attached to a barrel, and the barrel is attached to the firearm. So it's going to start out at the very end. So it's going to play these suppressors, or it's going to get these suppressors. What's the word? Where is it? Fire and aggregate system. So if we head over to the suppressor, you can see that it has it right here. It has its own fire and aggregate system. So if that does not exist, then it's going to aim and try to get the muzzle devices. If that is not, doesn't exist or anything like that, it will try to get the barrels. And same thing, if that doesn't exist, then it's going to try to get the firearms and go from there. So it basically works its way through the chain. So you have a normal, let's say a normal muzzle flash with no suppressor, then you throw a can on there. You can have your own different fire effect play, basically. So it's kind of on a per muzzle device basis. Moving on down, camera settings. So this is for the base firearm. This is without an optic, so I'll go ahead and actually take that off to make it a little easier to show you. So basically we have the camera field of view zoom. So this is at 10 by default. So as I aim in, it's zooming in by about 10 for the field of view, how fast it zooms in. And then this one is how close you are to the aiming portion. So right now it's at -5, and let's look at it. So I'm aiming, and we can see the charging handle is right at the, kind of like at the bottom of the screen. I reset this. Actually, I'm gonna put that just to 0. And then I aim. You can see it's noticeably farther away. It's actually just far enough to kind of break the left-hand IK because the arm can't stretch that far. But that's how that gets handled there. Then we have the used fixed camera distance. For the firearm, this can actually be ignored. So then we have whether or not we want to use left-hand IK with this firearm. So left-hand IK, obviously meaning, having your left hand be attached to a socket so you're gripping and you can move it based upon where you want to grip and that kind of stuff. Post collision, don't worry about it. Doesn't do really anything. I don't think anymore. I need to double check, but I might be able to remove that. And here we have spawn default parts from preset. So I have a saving and a loading system. So if I put the hollow sight back on, actually I might have a couple here already built. Let's see what test does. Okay, so this is my test one. As you can see, it's got the ATRC with no suppressor, and it has a light. Oh, fun. So basically what that does is if you have, crap, where is it? Oh, I had the wrong thing selected. So if you have this enabled, and let's say you've removed the hollow sight, so you have no optic or anything on the gun, and you save that as a profile. And then let's say you go to load that back up. Well, if you have a sight set as a default part, such as this, so this will be the hollow sight. If this is enabled, when you load that profile, it will spawn the hollow sight. However, if this is disabled, like it is now, it will not. It'll spawn it in the exact way you had the profile. So it basically reads from this. Next up is the grip animation. So the grip animation kind of works in conjunction with the left hand IK. So let's say you have specific poses that you want to have for gripping this handguard. So if you had one by default, you could make it play that pose. And you'll see the handguards have this as well. So the handguards have a grip animation. And if I head over to different forward grips, you can see again, this has a grip animation, but I'm actually using these. So this one is my CAC grip vertical, and I have the CAC grip animation set. If I load up this guy, you can see that this one has the stubby grip, or the vertical grip. I kind of need to rename these, set. So it performs that pose for your left hand. So you can kind of see, if I add this grip, I change my pose. If I add this guy here and then attach the CAC grip, it plays that pose. Or if I go to the angled grip, it plays that pose. So it allows you to kind of go through and blend and change your grips, similar to how Tarkov handles it as well, which is something that I really liked and wanted to implement. All right, that's one section out of the way. Let's head over to sockets. So firearm grip socket. This is going to be where your firearm gets attached to your character. So for example, I have a socket on the right hand called CC_firearm grip. I attach it there. The grip socket offset is how you want it to be offset from that grip. So if I give it a Z of 10 and hit play, you will see the firearm is up a lot higher, and it's actually sitting out of the right hand now. So it offset it from the right hand. So I can revert that back to 0. Then we have our muzzle socket. So this is going to be where your projectiles and all that kind of stuff would fire from, and how everything gets calculated in the system for like zeroing and not zeroing, but getting a, well, basically this function here, which gets muzzle projectile socket transform. So I can kind of have it zero at a specific range and give it a random accuracy within a set amount that you specify. So that needs to be set for that to kind of work. However, again, just like with the particle effects or the muzzle fire effects, it works down the chain. So because I have a suppressor on mine, it's going to start at the suppressor, and it's going to use that suppressor's muzzle socket for shooting. Then we have the aim socket, so that's the default aim socket, which you saw when I took the hollow sight off. And then we have the point aim sockets. So this is very useful, and you can kind of go between each of these modes. So for example, here's my normal aiming, and I'm going to go to my point aiming. So I have one here, and I have one above the sight. So I can go between them like I need to or however I want, and then I can go right back to aiming with whatever actual sight options that I have. So you can go in and out. Then you have the left hand IK. So this is kind of like your default grip, so to speak. So if I remove my handguard, you can see I have just a simple socket right here, where normally, I guess, I would technically want it to be gripping the magwell, but I haven't made a pose for that. So that's kind of how that gets handled there. Next up, we have aiming. So point aim, ADS, interpolation multiplier. So when you go to point aim, this is how much faster you would want to aim with it. So if you want to like just kind of like do a quick point shoot to have some more advantage or a reason to use it, you would want to have this at like a higher value so it aims faster. So if I set this to something stupid like 8, so here's my normal aim speed. And now if I go to point aim, I'm super quick. So that's kind of like the idea behind it. Now we have the unaim multiplier being the same as the ADS. So this will make it so when you go to unaim, it goes the same speed as you aiming. And then we have the unaim interpolation multiplier. So how fast do you want to unaim compared to aiming? So you might want to do it quicker, hence why I have it at 1.2. Now the shoulder stock offset. So this is for remote clients. So basically the way to describe this, actually I'll do it this way. So if I aim for myself and I eject, you can see the firearm is basically just right in front of the camera. So I have the camera right in front of the right eye. So that's where the sight is. It aligns it to the camera. The head doesn't tilt or anything like that. That's where it gets placed. However, if you play with 2 clients and you look at the other client like this, you can see the firearm goes to the shoulder instead of directly to the right eye, where your camera would be. So it kind of corrects that. So that's what that is. So you can adjust where you want the firearm to be positioned when you're aiming, when you're looking at other people. So like what you see other people aiming as, this is kind of what controls it. And then we have the head aim rotation. That's just that little head tilt that you saw for other clients as well. Now, the crap ton of poses. What are they? So we have first person and third person. They are all equivalent. It's just like with the shoulder stock offset, it's just different poses. So you have one for your first person view and one for your third person view that other people will be seeing. So we're just going to do the list of one of these because the other one's the exact same. So the first person, what is the short stock pose? Well, that is for collision with the firearm. So if I walk into this wall, I'm starting to go into the short stock pose. So that's basically me compressing. And then as I go too far, I go into high port. If I look down, I go into low port. So it's kind of like a blend between those for your collision. So that's your short stock pose. Then you just saw the high and low port pose, which are basically, these. Here I'll go into high port, I'll go into normal, and I'll go into low port, which is basically just the firearm being kind of pointed down. So next up, we have the base pose offset. So if you recall, the grip socket offset kind of works like that, but it works with gripping too. So if I set this one to 10, like I did before with the other one, you can see the firearm's up here again. However, it is actually gripping it. So you can kind of adjust your actual, base pose, so to speak, hence the name, base pose offset, by modifying that. And for all these poses, I actually have a simple system here. So I press 5 to go into it. I can adjust the base pose right here. So I'll set it to 10, and I'll set it back to 0. I can go to sprint pose and modify this how I want. I can go to my high port, I can modify that, low port, all that stuff. And you can modify it to kind of suit your needs. And then when you hit save on it, so if I hit save poses, this will actually overwrite these values for the one that you set. Now, animation. So this is kind of a lot of basically your recoil stuff mostly. That's a lot of it. But your sway multipliers. So your movement roll and your movement pitch. So this is kind of like your, as I move left, see the firearm kind of has a little bit of a tilt to it. If I jump, it kind of lags behind, that kind of stuff. Then we have our rotation lag and movement lag. So this is by kind of how much it's going to lag when you're turning or if you're moving. Then we have our pose settings. So our aim, interpolation, multiplier. So this is kind of like the default of how fast do we want to aim generally. So we can increase this and we'll aim faster. And this is our port pose. So if we go into high port, how fast do we want to go into that? If we go into low port, how fast do we want to go into that? So it kind of alters how fast you can go in and out of those poses. Then our curve and shake settings. These are mostly for kind of random stuff. So your shake curve, for example, I play shake curve when you go out of your high and low port. So when I go to normal, you'll see a little shake. It's kind of hard to see, but I play just a little shake, kind of give it the effect of a settle. So that's what I'm playing here. So this is your duration. So how long does this shake exist, or how long do you want it to play? I want mine to play for 3 seconds, so mine will end about here. Then we have the movement sway curve. So this is your walking and sprinting sway. So as I walk, this is the sway that's playing. And if I sprint, it's still playing the same thing. It's just amplified with the pose on top of it. Oops. And here we have perform shake after port pose. So this is kind of like that, what I just showed you, going from high port to normal. That's kind of like that default option. If you disable it, it won't have any of that shake. How fast do you want it to shake? And do you want to control the movement sway based on your stats? So basically, the heavier your firearm, the more sway you would have if this is enabled. If this is disabled, it's not going to change it at all, no matter how much weight and stuff gets added. And same thing goes with the camera shake. And then we have finally our fire camera shake. So this gets played by default. If you have it set in the example, you can just barely see it, but it kind of gives just a very subtle camera shake. Next up, we have our recoil data. So this is kind of the heart of the recoil system. So you have 2 curves, one's for the location and one's for the rotation. So here's the one for the rotation and here's the one for the location to kind of alter how your gun recoils. Then you have some randomness for your location. So this is like a min-max mostly for going towards you. I don't have one for the X, Y, and Z because they're really not needed in my opinion. They're so subtle anyways. Then you have your recoil pitch, roll, and yaw randomness. So this is going to be how much does your gun, for example, the pitch. Do you want to go between 1 and 2 times the normal that you set the rotation for? or you want it to go, heavily amplified. So we'll do 1 and, I don't know, we'll do something stupid high like 50. So if I shoot, it's just giving me a value between 1 and 50 that it's multiplying our recoil by. But I like to leave it between 1 and 2 and then mostly control it by the rotation itself. It gives it a little subtle change. Now for the roll, so this is the gun tilting left and right, and the yaw, which is the gun pointing left and right. So kind of how much randomness do you want in that? So do you want the gun to favor a specific side? So if you want it to favor to the right, you could do something like the minimum. That would be like a 0 and the max, or sorry, and for 0 for the mins. And this should make the gun favor to the right. Just like that. So when I have them set to be balanced for both, so -3 and +3, -8 and +8, that allows it to go back and forth left and right evenly, but it's still random between those points. It just kind of bounces around, so to speak. And lastly, we have the default sway multiplier. So that's at 2. So if I aim and I turn, just keep a steady pace. That's about how much it sways. If I bump this up to like 5, we're going to probably be hitting the max limits. So it's a little farther, but it's not too crazy. But you can kind of adjust that as you see fit. So that pretty much sums up the bulk of the actual firearm settings. There's a ton more to go into. Like here I have an entire example set up for you that you can kind of go through and copy and paste or just look for by reference, but there's a ton of different functionality kind of built into it already. And functions to really kind of help you, like, is aiming. So if we are aiming, we perform procedural recoil with a specific multiplier for ADS, which is 1.2. Otherwise, if we're not aiming, we use a different multiplier. So I do 2. So I have more recoil when we are not aiming, and I don't play camera shake compared to when we are aiming. And a lot of kind of just random stuff like that you can kind of go through and, set up for yourself. Same thing goes for if you're stabilized. So if you're stabilized, what I want to do is I want to reduce the amount of recoil that actually gets played by half. So you kind of give bracing a purpose and all that kind of stuff. We have firearm heat. So that kind of handles your muzzle devices such as your suppressor and barrel's heat. So you can play the different effects and all that kind of stuff. This is going to be a little loud. You can see the muzzle start to get hot. Like so, and eventually the barrel will start glowing once the barrel heats up more, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a ton of functionality built in behind the scenes. You just have to learn and figure out how to plug it up. So it works I kind of build everything off of the same guidelines that Unreal uses. So if you're familiar with working with actors and components and Unreal in general, this really shouldn't be hard for you at all. It's the same concept, you just got to kind of learn it. So anyways, that's going to wrap up this video. If you're interested in this plugin, it'll be linked down in the description below. And if you have any questions, feel free to hop on my Discord and I'll try to help you out. So I'll see you in the next video.